invest in people in the long term, there has to be a mutual understanding.
Hustle hard. Closed mouths don't get fed. Thinking strategically, but acting like a gorilla is the kind of marketing that's small for the planet. Innovate very little. It's highly risk averse.
Somebody said we have to think. That strategy challenges us. And the thinking process and the strategic process that we undergo as managers and leaders prior to attacking a mission or vision or whatever it may be could be one of the most important processes that we ever engage in as leaders, as supervisors, as managers of any organization. Why do I say that? Is it fair to say that making decisions as a leader and a manager is an important role? If we were to make the wrong decisions and we had people under our leadership, essentially the decisions we make are going to affect the people on our team, and we make the wrong decision, what could happen? And when we think about our ability as leaders and managers to pause, to engage in a strategic process and have some level of strategic leadership, and we could potentially prevent what the word I was looking for is the consequences of failure. Consequences of failure is, hey, we didn't make money this month, so we have to lay people off. That's a consequence. We didn't make money this month, so we have to cut everyone's wages. That's a consequence. We didn't make money this month, so I'm fired. That's a consequence. So if we want to prevent negative consequences from happening, engaging in a strategic process, it's almost like we are beholden to that, that we're obligated to do that as managers and leaders. And if we don't do that, if we don't take this subject matter somewhat seriously, and we don't engage in this process, we're really not doing our duty as leaders. We're not using our minds and using our brains and doing something called conceptual thinking and thinking about, well, what if I did this? What could happen? Do we have the right resources and capabilities to go in this direction? Should we serve this particular target market or this segment, or is this segment, if we put $10,000 behind marketing and we just open up a new restaurant and we chose to spend all of our money on social media, and unfortunately we didn't get anyone to attend our restaurant, the choice that we made to put that money in social media was the wrong choice. So should we have paused and asked ourselves, okay, if we're looking for consumers between the ages of 30 and 40 and say they're mostly working men and women, what's the best way to advertise for our restaurant? And think about a couple of different options and maybe allocate your marketing dollars accordingly to like 4 different things and measure the outcomes of those 4 different things and say, well, this one's working really well. Let's now adjust and pivot our strategy in this direction. If we went through a set of decisions based on what I just said, that would be a much better use of the $10,000 versus let's put it all here and let's roll the dice and let's just make a decision and haphazardly move on with our day. That would be doing a disservice to our team. It would be a disservice to our organization. It would be doing a disservice to our money, our hard-earned money and resources. So again, I can go on and on with the importance of thinking strategically, not just in leading companies, but in everything that we do. How are my words going to impact the people around me? Do I even use my words intentionally in order to create influence within my community? Or am I just, responding to amygdala hijacks and just saying whatever I want to say, whenever I want to say it? And, I hope that nothing bad happens. So this would be the antithesis of a strategic thinker. So here's a definition. The determination, is a big word, of the long run goals. So we got goals in there and objectives of an enterprise and the adoption of courses of action and the allocation of resources necessary for carrying out these goals. So that's a long definition. Let's break that down. So when you say determination, what's another word for determination? It's decision. You've determined something. So choice or decision would be a good word. So we're choosing long run goals. So we're selecting goals. Let's think about the strategic process. First, we got to select a goal. Our goal is to get to the moon. Okay, cool. And objectives. Our goal is to get to the moon using $66 billion and making sure nobody dies along the way. So it's like a goal plus, hey, there's some other objectives we have along with that goal. Of an enterprise or company, same thing. And the adoption of courses of action. Like, let's forget about adoption of. So we have choices for goals, and then we have courses of action. What's another word for course of action? The tactics you use. So courses of action is just another word for, okay, what are we going to do to achieve these long-run goals that we've decided to achieve? Pretty straightforward. And the allocation of resources. When you think about resources, we're going to talk a lot about resources in this class. What's an example of a resource? Let me look at money for a second. Somebody who does not think strategically, I use the $10,000 example, can burn through money like it's nothing. So when we think about money, it's not just money as a resource, but money invested wisely in the right things can be a resource. Money invested at the casinos in Las Vegas and being spent on blackjack consistently is going to lose. You're going to lose money. You know what I mean? The house is against you. But when you can use money wisely, it can be a resource. Okay, so when somebody else said assets, or what's another example of resource? Assets is too vague. Human resources, people. What else? So Technological resources usually make your processes better. There's usually intellectual property involved in it. So yes, there could be intellectual property as a resource, and certainly when you think about your proprietary process, that can also be a resource as well using technology. Okay, that's good. How about facilities? How about equipment? Think about Miami Dade College Homestead campus. They have a massive resource in the C building that they just built down there next to the train station. So that resource is awesome if they use it to achieve their strategic objectives. And let me try to connect these dots for you for a second, and we'll get out of this definition. I have a few more. We have a goal and we have an objective, and we've chosen a few courses of action, and we've determined that we need certain resources along the course of action to achieve that goal. And one of those resources is the C building at the Homestead campus, which is a brand new building. It probably is a 12, 13, $14 million building. Is that a good, are we using that resource appropriately in order to achieve our goals? We can build the building and spend the money. But if that building isn't being used for the objectives that Miami-Dade College has, that have successful or amazing student engagement, to be able to work with trade associations, to be able to use technology, to partner with local, whatever their objectives are. And it's just sort of, oh, we're going to build a building because we have extra money, and we're just going to plop the building here, and people can use it however they want. You can see how that building, that $15 million physical facility, could not be used to achieve its objective. It has to be channeled specifically for the strategic intent. So resources are vital when it comes to successful strategy, and being able to understand one's resources and seeing, okay, how much money do I have? Where are my buildings located? Where are my search engine optimization most likely to take place? How many Instagram accounts do I have? Facebook accounts, TikTok accounts? How am I going to use all of these things I own and take all of these resources and have actions with these resources to help me achieve my goals? So it's like focusing your resources, not just saying, oh, I have some money, oh, I have a building. No, those things need to be used like a laser beam in order to achieve your goals. That's a really fundamental point that I'm going to get back to probably throughout the class. All right, so let's move to another definition. So this is an articulation in words of what I just tried to get you to envision. A well-formulated strategy helps to marshal, which is sort of gather and get everything aligned, and allocate. So I marshal them, they're all aligned. And now I allocate things to support them, money, time, energy, and organization's resources into a unique and viable posture. We can imagine that based upon its relative internal competencies. So do you guys know this cartoon? There's a couple of them back in the day. One of them is called Power Rangers. There's some relevance. So for those of you who don't, there's like a yellow Power Ranger and a pink Power Ranger and a black Power Ranger and a blue Power Ranger and I don't know, maybe a white one. Who knows? But they're all fighting the enemies and they're doing their thing. And then all of a sudden, the enemy is like overpowering them, right? Because their resources are essentially scattered throughout the Power Ranger universe, and they're fighting over here, and they're fighting over here. But so now they know how to marshal and what's the other word? Marshal and allocate and get into a viable posture. And what happens when they marshal and allocate and get to this viable posture as Power Rangers? So if you're looking for a visual to understand what it's like to see the resources actively moving, but then they're losing because they're spread out, they're not focused. And then the resources come together into this monster, this robot essentially that is huge. It looks like a Tyrannosaurus Rex or something. And it's able to defeat the opponent because they came together and used all of their resources. They marshaled and postured themselves in order to defeat the enemy. So that's a perfect understanding of what a good strategy does, is it takes the resources, brings them together, and attacks its opponent in a collective fashion. It's a powerful concept. And it's really, really fun to talk about and think about as we unpack some of these businesses that we're going to study throughout the semester. Google, Uber, Trader Joe's. We're going to look at McDonald's. These are some examples. I don't know if those are actually the case. Toyota is one of them. How did they do this? Why did they do it? What was their goal? What was their objective? What competencies and capabilities this organization have? And how did they use their competencies and capabilities along with their resources to achieve their objectives? It's a powerful concept. So thank you, lady, for reading it. What is the purpose of corporate strategy? To enhance the strategic positions of its business units and ensure renewal. What does renewal mean as far as ensuring renewal? That's it. Exactly. I could not have defined that any better in this context. Continuing to operate and renew. So think about when you renew your YouTube subscription or when you renew your Netflix subscription, you're continuing to have access to everything that is within Netflix. So when you're renewing your organization, it means that you're still operating. You still have access to your resources. You still have access to your customers. You're still doing business. And the great thing is the strategy hopefully will help you become better at renewal. Imagine you renew at Netflix, and all of a sudden, not only do you renew at Netflix, but with your renewal at Netflix, you now have access to Prime and your YouTube subscription. So you have even more resources with that renewal. And a successful strategy, you're able to gain profit, gain market share. And when you renew your business, you're making it better and better, like the James Clear concept with Atomic Habits, 1% every single day. And that 1% adds up. And eventually your competition is going to look at you as that Power Ranger that came together, essentially. And they're going to say, how did this company get so good at doing this? And well, because we were strategic and because we aligned our resources and because we had a strategy and our managers and leaders went through a strategic planning process. So yeah, these definitions are good ones. This is the last point. I know it's kind of a blurry slide, but I wanted to put it in here because it's one of my favorites if you can bear with me. So there's a difference between something called value appropriation and value creation. Any business, any strategy wants to create more value for customers and for stakeholders. We get it. But in this class in particular, we're going to shed away from this concept of stakeholder perspective because it's complex and it's complicated and it's hard to measure. For instance, if you look down here where it says stakeholder perspective, which is value creation, you think about employees of your organization. How do you create value for your employees of your organization? If you're a manager or leader, well, you increase their wages, you increase their salary, you increase their benefits. That's one way you can create value for employees, just as an example. You think about, from again, the stakeholder perspective is you're thinking about customers and community, and you're thinking about employees, and you're thinking about shareholders, and you're thinking about suppliers, you're thinking about a bunch of people. And so for lenders too, lenders, when you borrow money from lenders, they get paid interest. That's the value that you create for them from the stakeholders' perspective. Landlords, if you are a tenant as a business owner or manager and you're paying your landlord rent, that's value to them. Rent, awesome. The government gets taxes, that's value to them when you operate as a business. Customers, there's something called customer surplus. Does anybody know what customer surplus is? Gosh, so you buy a surfboard from me. Let's use that as a better example. And your surfboard, say you spent $200 on this surfboard. And not only was that surfboard amazing, the $200, but you thought to yourself, man, you kept that surfboard for 5 years, and that surfboard was the best surfboard you've ever bought. And you were riding waves like a champ out there in Miami Beach or wherever you go surfing. To you, that $200, you would have paid $400 for that. So that extra $200 of value that product created is called customer surplus. Does that make sense? Exactly. So if I go to let's say I go to the Apple store and I need to buy some new AirPods. And I last time I went looking at AirPods was at Best Buy and they were like, $250. And they just were too expensive. I go to the Apple store and I get the AirPods for $100. And they're just as good, if not better, than the $250 AirPods that I saw 2 years ago. In my mind, I just received a surplus. I received more benefit than what I basically would have paid more, and I got the same kind of value for less money. So that's customer surplus. And it's really customer surplus is created through organizations that innovate, that are strategic, all this kind of stuff. So customer surplus is typically a good thing. We want to give customers more value than what they paid for. That's the goal, and they keep coming back. Pricing, really you want to give them the same amount of value. Like they could have gotten me to pay 250, so I should have paid 250, but that's a different conversation. So you get the idea. That's customer surplus. Society at large, sustainable growth is a good thing for people to have. So you see how complicated this is. How do you measure this stuff? How do we strategically plan for all of these different stakeholders? So I put this slide on here so we can kind of suppress or just dim the light, unfortunately, of the stakeholder perspective and focusing on value creation. Most of this course is going to be real simple, real straightforward. It's going to be focused on winning, and it's going to be focused on something we call value appropriation, which is its owners, profits, and market valuation. So basically, what are we doing so that we can increase the value of this company or increase the profit of this company so we can continue to reinvest in the company, so we can continue to have investors, give us more funds, and we can continue doing what we're doing and building a strategic competitive advantage, which we'll talk about. So that's why I put this slide up here. We're going to focus mostly on value appropriation, which is mostly towards owners, profits, and market valuation to shareholders. Increase the value for shareholders because it's a little bit more straightforward. It's a little bit easier to understand. And typically, if we can create more value for shareholders and if the company in general is increasing in value, there's a good chance that a lot of stakeholders are also winning as well, especially if we have morals and ethics. So that's my start with a little teaser with the subject matter. Hopefully that gets you excited with some of the stories that we're going to share, some organizations that we're going to be able to look at, and some of the things that we're going to talk about in this class when it comes to strategy. And hopefully it's clear to you now how important strategy is. We want to be smarter. We want to work smarter and not harder. We want to do the time and energy and effort it takes to go through a strategic planning process before we engage in decision making and before we attack the opponent essentially in business, because business is a competitive environment, so that we don't make mistakes, so that we can learn from other people's mistakes and make the right decisions so that the consequences are not negative, the consequences are positive. And as managers and leaders, if we can gravitate towards building momentum, we can gravitate towards performance objectives, and we're good at strategy, I promise you, life is going to be just a wee bit easier for all of us. So hopefully that's convincing. A good way to put it. How I would define goodwill, how I know goodwill in my mind is defined, is when somebody pays, like business buys another business and they pay a little bit extra for the business that would be considered goodwill. Like they have a reputation or a legacy. You can't really tangibilize it, but you can't objectify it, but they pay a little bit more. So yeah, that same premise could be applied to customer surplus. But in business, we I would say the customer surplus usually is called that. It's called customer surplus and not goodwill. Probably because you wouldn't want a lot of, say, shareholders saying, "Yeah, we're providing goodwill to our customers and we're just giving them free stuff." That probably we would prefer to call it customer surplus. It probably sounds better. But I could see how those two relate. It's really value. McDonald's is a great example of it because, and Walmart too, is why do we go and shop at Walmart? Every day it's a sale. There was a commercial where it's like we don't need for sale signs. Every single thing in the store is going to be for sale because that's just who we are. Everything is low price. Every day, all the time, all the items. And that's the value that they create because they set up their business model so that they are extremely efficient with their supply chain. They're capable of capturing something called economies of scale, and they are a low cost competitor. It's really a low cost strategy that we'll learn a lot about. And by building a low cost strategy and by forcing their producers and manufacturers of the products to give them in bulk a lot of products for less money, they can pass value along to the customers through low prices. So that's why we go there because we can get a box of Cheerios for less than we get a box of Cheerios at Publix, maybe. And it's the same box of Cheerios, so it's value. And that's like a customer surplus. So that's why we keep going. Learn exactly how to compete in those kinds of environments. And likely, and I'm not saying Toys R Us, I'm looking at when you see successful strategy here, ignore superior performance, growth and market share, whatever. Successful strategy, 20% of us being successful. Let's just say this class, we were all in one company and we are all in a strategic planning process right now. And we had $100 million. And that's a lot of money. So we have to decide in what industry are we going to purchase a company and start building a business? What industry, meaning the airline industry, the package delivery industry, the technological industry, the trade service industry, the education industry? Where are we going to, what industry are we going to compete in? And that choice alone, which is all of chapter 2, by the way, determines 20% of whether or not you're going to be successful. That decision alone. What industry am I in? Fascinating. The next 30% are our resources, which is cash, facilities, intellectual property, human resources, equipment, supplier relationships, this kind of stuff, resources, and capabilities, which is also called competencies, processes, culture, brand, design, whatever, this kind of stuff. So what industry we're in, 20%, our resources and competencies, 30%. So what resources do we have and what competencies or capabilities do we have is going to be 30% of our ability to be successful. Guess what the other 50% is? It's luck.
Yeah.
If you guys read this book by Malcolm Gladwell, it's called Outliers, I believe. He talked about Bill Gates, the 50% Bill Gates, just simply being lucky of the generation or the time in which he was born and the environment that he was around. And he had access to his computer lab at his university that he went to his freshman year. I think he ended up dropping out, but he had like full-blown 24-hour access to use this resource, which was essentially a monster computer that he was able to start figuring out how to use and learn about it. But he just happened to be in the right place at the right time, essentially. And that allowed him to use his resources and his competencies to achieve significant success. So how much of Bill Gates' success can we logically attribute to just blind luck and being in the right place at the right time? It's debatable. And I would think that most people, if you really study it, there's a good amount, according to Malcolm Gladwell, that attributes Bill Gates' success to simply being lucky. And organizations are the same thing. But yes, we can plan, and yes, we can have the right resources, and yes, we can build up our competencies and our capabilities. But outside of that, turbulence in the environment, political turbulence, you have a technological disruption. All of these things are completely out of our control. How do we know, whether or not those things are going to affect us or not affect us? So I find that interesting, in a sense, and somewhat depressing in a sense. Like a lot of it, we just simply can't control. I mean, if you've got a family of 10 and you're living on, $200 a week and you just made dinner, you better believe everybody's going to finish their dinner. And that's what Toyota was capable of doing. So the interesting thing is because they had limited resources, they likely became good at something else, right? Like they became good at their process. They became good at their ability to make cars within a certain constraint. And what was the fascinating thing that they did on their assembly line that was different and more innovative than some of their competitors? They likely focused a lot of their energy. Once they saw success, they saw an area where their capabilities and their competencies were performing, like something's working here. They channeled all of their resources into that. They said, okay, this is working. Let's bring everybody here. Let's do it like this. And let's go. Let's start putting more facilities, more people, more money behind this operation because it's working well. That's why they were able to double, because they saw something that was working and they went and attacked it. For whatever reason, the image came to mind. If you throw a piece of like meat into the piranha tank, the piranhas come and eat the meat really quickly. But so that's what Toyota did. They allocated all their resources to that one area in order to be effective. So think about that assembly line again. There's something that they did on the assembly line, in addition to what Lady said, that helped them improve. Or were they doing it? They were doing it by, okay, if there's an issue here, we'll talk about the issue and somebody down there will fix it. We'll report the issue, somebody down there will fix it. Well, I'm not going to stop the assembly line. The interesting thing is they stopped the assembly line, they stopped the operation. Everybody went to the issue and learned. This is the big thing. They learned what in the heck is going on with this issue. At the time, that wasn't quite right. But that's the fascinating thing about strategy, is every once in a while with strategy, you can be tactical. You can be strategic would be overusing the word strategy, but you can be creative with the way you approach something so that your people are learning. And when people are learning, their performance and their output increases significantly. So you can see how Toyota, I'm going to define strategy here, a set of related actions that managers take, like choosing to get everybody to stop and learn about that issue on the assembly line. That's an action that managers took to increase their company's performance. That one little action alone allowed people to learn about the mistakes so that there weren't nearly as many mistakes. And so, yeah, it might take, 15 more minutes than it was supposed to, but that 15 minutes prevented hours of wasted time in the next 10 years of operation. So you can see how that decision that Toyota made was a strategic decision that panned out well for them and helped them compete better against their customers. So strategic leadership is creating competitive advantage through effective management of the strategy making process. So anybody have an idea of what competitive advantage is? You can even say it in your own words. What does it mean, competitive advantage? More people sign up, which means you have more profits, more students to teach. You've officially created a competitive advantage by decreasing your size of your class, giving more attention to students, producing smarter students that are kicking butt in the world, garnering attention from other parents who are sending additional students to your class. Voila, competitive advantage. Now you're getting somewhere. So you have Prime. Amazon offers a feature benefit called Prime, which draws customers into the service to sign up for Prime, which then makes it more convenient to shop. So then what happens when it's more convenient to shop for a plethora of customers? Reoccurring revenue stream, and that reoccurring revenue stream and that customer loyalty starts getting built up. And then people don't even think about Walmart anymore, because Walmart is, they're over there, because now we're committed to Amazon Prime, because we've built up a customer loyalty base by using features and benefits like Amazon Prime and subscription services and one-click buying, this kind of stuff. I want to be very clear, though, that is a competitive advantage. Let's think about it this way. Let's look at Walmart for a second. Could Walmart eventually compete better with Amazon and take away that competitive advantage that Amazon currently has? Starting to see how Walmart's resources and how Walmart is strategically postured to compete better against Amazon, because they have all of the distribution channels set up. They have all of the supplier relationships set up. All they have to do is entice the customers to come over here and sign up for some easy shopping experience and start clicking buttons over on Walmart's side as opposed to Amazon's side, and boom, next thing you know, the change of tide starts happening. So one thing that we need to consider, and I'm going to get off this slide, is that a competitive advantage does not last. This is a big component of the class. What does last, which is what we're going to try to unpack as we think about these organizations, is something called a sustainable competitive advantage. Can anybody give me an example of a sustainable competitive advantage on any company that they know that will last much longer than a 5-year, 10-year period? Find an example for this company called Apple. And if you can see, I'm holding up my Apple iPhone. Apple has built up something called a brand, and the brand has intellectual property associated with it. So when you see the Apple icon or the Apple logo, what does that icon represent to you in your mind? I mean, there's a lot there. So if you were to say, what could Apple do within the next 2 years to completely diminish their entire brand? Could they completely devalue their brand and reverse everything we just said? The answer is probably no. Apple has built up a sustainable competitive advantage over the years by executing well on strategy and building an image inside of all of the customers has of quality, dependability. The brand in itself gives them sustainable competitive advantage. One of the fascinating things that Apple did that also had them do sustainable competitive advantage was this thing called the Apple iStore. This was a long time ago, where they had this music that they were able to put on the iStore, or what is it called? Not the App Store, but the iMusic or Music Store, whatever you want to call it. And one of the reasons why they were able to create a sustainable competitive advantage there is because a lot of people were rifting or trying to steal money off of Napster. And they created a platform that the artists were able to get paid, and people were willing to pay per song. So when they got the rights to sell all of this music through their Apple store, their music store, whatever this thing is called, they set up strategically a sustainable competitive advantage in the music industry. So now people are listening to their music on their iPods at the time and their iPhones. And it was because of that Apple store where they had the distribution rights and they were paying the artists who wanted to be on the store. That would be a good example of something that's more sustainable, as opposed to something that's temporary that people can easily copy. So there you go. There's a few examples right there. Losing customers is different than losing a sustainable competitive advantage. Losing customers temporarily doesn't necessarily mean that your brand, which you've built up in customers' minds over the last 10 years, is completely ruined. So, if they put out some crappy phone and a bunch of people got upset about the crappy phone and it was a big news story, they still haven't lost their sustainable competitive advantage. They've just failed in one particular tactic. They fix it, they get the phone off the market, the brand is back intact. But let's just say that so all of these companies are coming out, to use an example to try to answer that question differently, that have these EV cars, these electric cars. And so there's a bunch of companies that are about to come onto the market with these new electric cars. They really only get one shot, with their new car to make people happy. If that new car is a failure, they're done. You know what I mean? But say Tesla puts out some new EV car and it's sort of a failure, that brand is not done. That's why it's sustainable, because they've created something that can sustain even though they make one or two bad decisions. Does that make sense? You think about this guy, Dr. Dre, and the fact that he stopped making music. But what did Dr. Dre start making as a businessman that gave him a royalty fees probably for the rest of his life within the music industry? He took his brand, essentially the Dr. Dre brand, and he associated it with a product of significant quality, and he transitioned his value from his producing and rapping and his name, and he put it over onto a headphone called Beats by Dre, and boom, it took off. So there's ways in which you could, re-strategize, replan, and do it. And we'll see a bunch of options to do that, because when you think about creating shareholder value, there's only a few ways you can do it. You could make more profit, right? You could make more money. You can achieve more market share is another way to do it. So you get more percentage of the market. You could offer additional return on capital is another way to do it. Or you can create new product lines, and you can buy new businesses, and you can explore new avenues of revenue growth. So one of the things that was fascinating to me, and I can't stand this, but maybe you guys can relate, is this company called Uber has done a great job creating this service or this product that essentially picks people up in their cars, and then they're able to transport them places. That was awesome, and I think it's a great service. And Uber Eats does the same thing. So I'll use Uber Eats as an example here. So now we have food. What's happening with Uber Eats is they're trying ways in which they want to make more money. So Uber Eats is exploring all of these different options, and let me try to explain. I order some tacos from Taco Bell on my Uber Eats, and Uber Eats says, okay, fine, you can order some tacos. I'm thankful for that. And there's like this little hidden fee in there of like, Uber Eats fee. So it charges me. I'm like, whatever, I don't care. And then it charges me a little bit extra for a delivery fee. Okay, fine, whatever. And then it asks me if I want to tip the driver. And I'm like, oh, okay, sure, I'll tip the driver. So Uber Eats is capturing 3 different ways of making money on me because of the convenience. That's cool. Now Uber Eats takes it a step further. And they say, okay, Claude, you're going to get some tacos. Thank you for ordering from Uber Eats. You're going to tip the driver. You're going to pay a bit of a delivery fee, and you're going to have some like service charge as well. So I'm like, fair enough. I don't feel like going anywhere. I'm getting it. Whatever. I'll pay $40 for 3 tacos. Whatever. And then what they dare say to me, because of this, they're trying to make more money, is say, Claude, we'll rush it to your house. We'll priority this to your house. It'll be there 15 minutes faster if you pay us $5 extra with Uber Eats priority. And so you can have the standard, Claude, and it'll be there in 20 minutes, but you can have the priority and it'll be there in 15 minutes. You just have to pay more money. How hungry are you? So you get the idea that they're exploring these different avenues of creating revenue strategically from their customers. So you can take it as you wish. Is that a good strategy to try to do that? Or should they try to do it a different way? Or how are they going to produce more value for their shareholders is the question. And you can see in some of those relevant examples how these companies are attempting to do that. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So real quick before we go to the side, formulating the strategy is one thing, implementing it is something different. So in this class, we're going to go through what would be considered a strategy formulation process, and I think that's really important. And then some of the chapters are going to be about implementing the strategy, which is just as important, if not more important, obviously, than coming up with a strategy. So this is just a cool visual. I really love it. What does it mean to create shareholder value? So if you can bear with me, if you look at this chart, I think it's a cool one. You think about effective strategies. What do effective strategies do? Well, profitability means that you have a percentage of your revenue that equals profit. Let's say your profitability is at 10%. Return on invested capital, that's ROIC. I give you $1 million, you give me back $1,100,000 next year. That's a 10% return on my capital, on my invested capital. That's profitability, 10%. Yet profit growth is the company went from making $10 million in profit to making $20 million in profit. Just because I grew in profit does not mean I'm returning money to my shareholders. Why does it not mean if I just made 10 million more dollars in profit, why as either a private company or even a public company do I have no obligation to give that to my shareholders? Do with say excessive profit, which would be retained earnings within a company. Do you have to give it to the owners of the company? What's another thing you can do with that money? Now, profitability is different than profit growth. Profitability, return on invested capital, means I'm getting a return on my money. Profit growth, which is equally as good if it's done well through strategic management. If my company makes a ton of money and I see none of it, that money goes back into the company to create more effective strategies that then produce more profit, that produce more profitability, and produce more shareholder value. So you can see how effective strategies produce two things, profitability and profit growth, and how those things both increase shareholder value, because one of them, profit growth, goes back into the company. The other one, return on invested capital, that money goes straight into my pocket as a shareholder. So effective strategies, or the effectiveness of strategies, cause these two things to happen. Huge things. We're talking specifically about profit. Here's just another way to see that. I know it's kind of a naughty slide, but it's a fun slide. Let's look at these two things down below. Strategic positioning, decisions on how to compete in an industry. How does Southwest Airlines compete in the airline industry? In addition to that, they got away from this hub and spoke model, which is a hub and spoke model. I think Miami is like a hub for American Airlines. Delta is a hub for in Atlanta. And so a lot of the flights sort of have to come in and out of Miami for logistical reasons. Southwest got away with that. They fly point to point, and they started opening up more flights. They used to not use travel agents. I think they might use travel agents now, but if I want on Expedia, I can't buy a Southwest flight. I got to go straight to Southwest Airlines. They used to not have seat arrangements or assigned seating, which means that when you come onto the plane, I think they changed that. But when you come on the plane, everybody sits down really fast. Why? Because they want to get on the plane and they want to sit down. So that creates some efficiency with the way in which they turn their planes around at the gate. So, and also quirky things happen on Southwest. They care about the people flying. They enjoy the process. They celebrate birthdays. They do fun games. Let's look down and see who's got the biggest hole in their sock or something like that. And whoever's got the biggest hole, hold it up in the air and we'll give you $100 gift certificate. And you have like CEOs and grandmoms like pulling off their socks and holding them in the air, and it's fun. And so these are some quirky things that they do. And if you give me a moment, there's a powerful read in this first chapter where it talks about Herb Kelleher, I think is his name, from Southwest, who was the founder of Southwest. And it talked about, I don't think I'm going to be able to find it, but basically, I'll tell you what this guy, Herb Kelleher, did. Herb would go on Southwest flights. There was one person that was a loyal Southwest customer for 10 years. And she said that I sat next to Herb Kelleher, the CEO and founder of Southwest Airlines, 3 different times on the plane. So Herb would just get on the plane, fly coach, and just hang out with the people flying the plane, and he would listen to them. He would understand what their gripes were. He would ask, like, how's your experience? How do you like Southwest? What can we do better? So he's getting information directly from his customers. So he was doing things. The purpose of the question is, how are they competing? The decisions on how to compete in an industry. Southwest has been a profitable company now for the last, I don't know how many years, where other airlines have been failing. They're competing differently within their industry. They're being creative, just like Toyota was being creative. Okay, so that's strategic positioning. Let's move over to resources and capabilities. How to execute and defend a strategic position. There's a fascinating biblical story that I might get these details wrong, but there was an army, let's call them the Philistines or whomever, that I think it was in Exodus, but there was an army of like, say, 10,000 people. And they were down in the mountain, they were down in like the valley area. And there were 10,000 of them. They were under no threat. They just were hanging out. It was nighttime. And there was a whole army there essentially. And let's call them the Israelites, were surrounding this area. And they only had, I think it was like 1,000 people or something like that. And they were like, what do we do? How do we have to fight these people, but we're totally outnumbered 1 to 10. And scripture says that God said, hey, this is what I want you to do. All I want you to do is surround this area. Everybody is going to turn on their torch like immediately. And what I want you to do is make as much noise as you possibly can and just run down there as quick as you possibly can and just scream. Noise, lights, scream, and everybody they had no idea anyone was coming, and they just started running down and converging on this area. And what happened is it created chaos amongst the 10,000 people. Nobody could see anything, and they started killing one another. And essentially the good guys, or whoever the biblical story was about at the time, won the war. So here's what I'm trying to say. They had less resources. They had less people, but they had a tactic or a capability that was different. So they used resources in a creative way to achieve a victory. How to execute and defend a strategic position? Well, they executed a attack strategy that was fundamentally different than what the enemy was expecting. So they won. And these things happen all the time. You always hear about these underdogs winning in races and athletes and teams. And it's because they were able to use the limited amount of resources that they had in a different kind of way to win. So we got strategic positioning, decisions on how to compete in industry, and then you have resources and capabilities, how to execute and defend a strategic position. So these two things working together, in addition to effective implementation and adaptation, adaptation is a whole other word we'll talk about in a second, to achieve successful strategy. So not only are you implementing your strategic positioning, which is those unique ways that Southwest does things to compete, and then not only are you using your resources in a creative way and your capabilities well, then you're implementing it effectively, you're focusing it in a sense to achieve a specific goal. So hopefully this is starting, I know it's kind of abstract, but it's starting to make sense because you're starting to hear these words over and over again, and you're starting to see it in real life. We already talked about shareholder value. I want to talk about risk capital for a second. Andrew, you got a birthday present from your rich uncle, and it's $500,000. Congratulations. But on the will of your rich uncle, it says, Andrew, I want you to invest in a business, a private business, where you're going to be a minority shareholder and you're not going to have control over the company. But I want you to invest this money in a business, period. And let me ask, Andrew, would you follow the orders of that will, and would you take that whole $500,000 and invest in a business? From his perspective, if God forbid, I hate to use it for your perspective, but God forbid you decided you were going to run away to Costa Rica and drop everything and your whole business, just forget about it. You were going to take your money and run, and you're gone. And that business fails. Nobody's there to operate it. It completely fails. Would your friend get his money back, his 400,000 or 100,000, however much he gave you? It wouldn't paint the picture. That the leading question I'm trying to create here is what's called risk capital. Is that sure. Investors in businesses have something called risk capital. They invest in a business and that business fails. They get nothing. They get a big goose egg. They get nothing back unless they liquidate the business. They might get like $10,000, $15,000 for every $100,000 they invested. But the reality is they lose most, if not all, of their investment. So that this is happening all over. Well, it's gambling if you don't take Professor Kershner's class and you're not strategic about your decisions, and you don't think about it. But I hear your point, and my point, and because I'm a believer in the capitalist system and a business owner myself, is it's so different than gambling. You couldn't even be further apart. And the reason why is when you make smart investments and you allocate them appropriately and you have a diversified portfolio, there's a very high likelihood that you're going to do well. And when I say do well, you're going to get 10, 20, 30 times the money you invested after 10, 15 years if you make the right decisions. But that's besides the point. But if you and I go into business together and you put $100,000 in, I put $100,000 in, and we create a business, and the business is failing. And by operating this business, we bought some cars and stuff like that. And we just decided we're going to liquidate everything. Yeah, we could sell the cars and we might get, some money back. But the reality is we don't get our investment back. And so the majority of the cases that we're talking about here are bigger companies with much more people, many more investors, and all the money they put in, typically if the business fails and goes bankrupt, they get nothing back. These are just bigger companies where investors later down the rung just simply, here's the point. It's risk capital. Equity capital invested with no guarantee, zero guarantee, that stockholders will recoup their cash or earn a decent return. Every single time you invest in the stock market, it's risk capital. You're putting money into an organization that you could very well lose all of it. And again, back to, I can see how that could relate to gambling if you just haphazardly put your money in. So that's a chance that happens. So if that's a chance that it happens, the reality is that we need to take that into consideration is why would decides that she's going to go ahead and take the risk? And she's going to give us, the owners and founders of GT46, the new SpaceX company that's going to go to Mars one day, because we're all very smart. She's going to give us $100,000. Why would she give us $100,000? Because she knows that the strategies we have are sound, and when we can execute well on the strategy, she's going to get a return on her capital. It's as simple as that. She wouldn't give us $100,000 because she's a nice person. I mean, obviously that stuff happens too. But the point is, I'm going to give you money because I believe in your business. I believe that when you invest my money in your business, that your strategies are sound, that your actions are sound, and that when you execute on your strategy, that we're going to win. That's why she gives us the money, because she believes in that. So how do we create that confidence in investors and shareholders to believe in our strategy so that we can then get money, so that we can return that money back to shareholders? So there's all sorts of companies out there today that obviously are doing this all the time. And, money's people on like Nucor Steel. I mean, a company you probably haven't heard of. There's a new company called Palantir, which is an organization that does government AI security contracting that's growing like crazy. That's getting a ton of money invested into them because they've demonstrated that they have good strategy and that their strategies align with making money for shareholders. So this is why they're attracting money, because of their sound execution on strategy. So that's profitability. profit growth we talked about. We looked at this slide. Competitive advantage versus sustained competitive advantage. We talked about that ad nauseum. Okay, what's a business model? Wow. So there's this lean startup class, which talks about a business model with these 9 different categories. And the 9 categories are value proposition, customer segments, customer relationships, revenue streams, channels. And then the back end of the business model is key activities, key resources, costs, key activities, key resources, costs, and there's one more, key relationships or key partners. I think it's partnerships. So that business model and how that business model works and interacts with one another is all done strategically. What customer segment you pick matters. How you serve that customer segment through the channels, do you do it online? Do you do it in the store? Matters. How you get, keep, and grow customers matters. The value proposition that you're offering that customer segment matters. All of these things are strategic choices. So this whole class is really going to get you to understand Walmart's business model, Google's business model, Uber's business model, SpaceX's business model, Tesla's business model. If you have the lens of strategy that hopefully you're learning in this class, you'll be able to take a look at that business model, understand why they're doing what they're doing, with whom they're doing it with, and how it works. And it's the conception of how strategies should work together as a whole to enable the company to achieve competitive advantage. That's what a business model is. Okay, so how do companies make money and how do they grow? There's 2 factors. It's relative success in its industry. We talked about that. That's 20% of its ability to succeed, and its overall performance of its industry relative to other industries. It's fascinating. Planning and thinking strategically are as important for the nonprofit sector as for the for-profit sector. So even if you're in, say, the healthcare business and you work for Baptist Health, which my wife works for Baptist Health, they're a nonprofit company, but nonprofit companies still need to make profit in an odd kind of way. What do they call that profit? They call it excess funds. They just don't call it profit, and they take the money and put it back into the company. But you better believe that nonprofit organizations are still in it to get funding for their operations so that they can create value for customers. So just because you say Miami Dade College, I don't think it's not a for-profit institution. It's a government funded backed, there's a lot of government involved. I don't think Miami Dade College is interested in making a profit to return to shareholders, is basically what I'm saying. I know they're not. But the reality is they still need to make money. They still need to operate. They still need to raise money from either government bodies or they need to get grant funding. They need to do all sorts of things. There's a whole department called development at Miami Dade College. So you better believe they have to think strategically. They're without a doubt competing against FIU, all these other colleges who are also enticing people to go and learn from them. Hopefully you get just as good, if not better, education at Miami Dade College, but that's a different topic. So expected to use the resources efficiently and operate effectively. These are nonprofits. Nonprofits compete for scarce resources just as businesses do. Couldn't say that better myself. So real. People think general manager. Wow, that's not really a fun job. Guess what? A general manager is like a CEO. A general manager generally manages the entire operation. So they're in charge of strategy formulation. They're in charge of strategy implementation. They're in charge of measuring performance. There's a lot of things that general managers are in charge of. So if you're generally managing, you're overseeing everything. It's sort of a corporate level management experience. A functional manager only oversees the accounting department or the operations department or the marketing department. It oversees a function within the operation. And the functional manager needs to execute on the corporate strategy. So the strategy is formulated at the general manager level. The functional managers need to understand the strategy. They need to execute on the strategy. And if you're smart as a general manager and you're smart as a CEO, you're listening to and communicating with some of your functional managers to get insight. How's it going? Is it working? Are we doing a good job? Next year, can you come and help us formulate the strategy differently based on what you've been experiencing? So it's a collaboration between obviously general managers and functional managers, but these are 2 separate strategic individuals within the company. Is anyone a general manager or a functional manager within this class? So a branch manager, I would say, is somewhat of a general manager because I'm assuming that you're in charge of that entire branch. Are you privy to the profit and loss and all of the figures that branch, either how many customers they have and their customer growth statistics? Are you privy to all that? If the bank does good, meaning if they achieve their goals, are you then thanked for your efforts in leading that bank? Sometimes, say branch managers, sometimes they're not actively involved with strategic decision making. But if you're a general manager and you're sort of in charge of making sure your bank branch performs well, you're sort of functioning within a general manager responsibility. I mean, they generally manage. Let's not get too crazy. Functionally managing the execution of a class. So I'm working right now as a functional manager. Managers, let's say teachers, responsible for supervising, teaching a particular function, a class that is a task or an activity. These are things I have to do. Or operations such as, teaching class, marketing, research, and development, information technology, or logistics. So it's a functional manager level. Just because I don't have anyone working specifically for me, I can still functionally manage a task or an aspect of an organization. It tends to be that managers usually have people reporting to them or they can just be overseeing a particular function within the company. So interesting slide. I want you to just focus on this particular aspect here, because this is something we're going to come back to often. And it's important to understand where decisions are being made and what's happening at these three different levels. We have a corporate level, which is the CEO, the board of directors, and corporate staff. We have a business level, which is divisional managers and staff. And then we have a functional level, which are functional managers. We just talked about that. So the fun thing about strategy is it's so important at all of these levels. There's major decisions made at the business level and executed on the business level. There's major decisions made at the functional level and certainly the corporate level. You'll see with the case of McDonald's that a lot of their strategy and their ability to achieve their competitive advantage happens at the functional level. And I'll give a quick example of that. Brief. I'm thinking about McDonald's. Let me give you a brief background. I used to not like McDonald's. I'll be honest with you. I wasn't a fan, whatever, until I started becoming a professor and teaching this class. And then I realized McDonald's is kick butt. And we'll talk more about that throughout the term, but they are so good at their functional level activities, the tactical things they do to create value, very similar to Toyota in their processes and how they do things and how they create value for customers and how they keep costs low. And this is a fun video. This is a gentleman named, this is from a movie called The Founder. And the person who founded McDonald's was not Ray Kroc. Make sure that we understand. It was the McDonald's brothers. Ray Kroc is who brought McDonald's to the world. He was able to scale McDonald's. And I think he was a bit mischievous in his efforts there. But the founders of McDonald's were the geniuses behind some of the operations. So let's watch this short clip. So do you see how McDonald's at the functional level is producing value for its customers? And it's innovative intentionally. There's strategic decisions about how long the French fries need to cook for. There's a strategic decision about whether you say burger crossing so that you don't knock the burgers over, because if you knock the burgers over, there's waste. And we don't want waste because we want to be efficient. And the more efficient we are, the more value we can offer customers because we can not have nearly as much waste. So very similar to Toyota, but you can see it in maybe a company that you're more aware of and how the functional level, believe me, those are strategic decisions that operate all the way through the chain of the organization, but it's achieved, the strategy and the values created at the functional level. And that's kind of what's cool about McDonald's. That's not always the case. Sometimes the value is created at the corporate level because they choose to invest in organizations or industries that are extremely profitable. They don't need to function that well because they, invest with Warren Buffett. When you have $10 million and you put it into Berkshire Hathaway, that's just a corporate decision, and Berkshire Hathaway makes 20% of your money, and that's it. So you get the idea. Let's think about this. I don't know if this is the case, but Chick-fil-A says we want to make sure we greet everybody who comes in through the door. But the problem with that is you're going to need two people standing behind the register. One person's going to have to be taking orders because they're going to be focused on the existing customer, right? Eye contact. And another person's literally just going to be standing there and saying hello to the people who walk in and directing them accordingly. That's a strategic decision that's costly. It's going to cost them additional money, but what is it going to do? It's going to provide that customer to feel welcomed, to the store is hospitable, they hear a friendly voice. Maybe this person can be training at the same time. And it's a strategic decision to invest, very important, in customer experience. Hugely important. Starbucks, when we think about Starbucks, and we'll talk about that at some point, they do the same thing. You go to Starbucks, you're paying way more money than you will at McDonald's for a cup of coffee. Why? Because they create an experience. The floors are clean, the baristas are wearing the same things. The baristas are highly trained. It's fairly efficient. They're good. The quality of the coffee is good. And they've made these strategic investments over time to create an experience for customers. And that's not done haphazardly. That's the point of this class. It's done strategically. There are decisions that are made along the way to ensure that the customer has a good experience. And when you say a good experience, that's fun. Like Chick-fil-A makes us feel good. That's fun to say. But what are you talking about? How do you define feel good? How can you define it and measure it is the point. And if you can't define it and measure it, it's not strategic. It's just gambling. It's, let's go ahead and be nice to our customers today. So one day you're nice to your customers and the next day you're not. That's really helpful. No, it's done intentionally and it's measured and it's produced with strategic thought in mind. So what does the strategic planning process look like? Select a corporate mission or vision, mission or goals, very important. Mission is why do we exist? Why do we exist? That's the one. Goals is where are we going? And vision, by the way, is the desired future state. You hear mission, why do we exist? Goals is, what are we trying to do here? And then vision is what's our desired future state? What does the future look like when we close our eyes and picture it? That's vision. Analyze the organization's external competitive environment. So that's the industry, what's happening outside, this kind of stuff. Identify opportunities and threats within the external environment. Analyze the internal operating environment. These are what we possess as an organization, our capabilities, our strengths, our weaknesses, our competencies. These are other words for strengths and weaknesses, what we're good at, what we're not good at. So you look at the external, you look at the internal, then you select organizational strategies that build on strengths and correct weaknesses. So you don't want to select an organizational strategy that builds on your weaknesses, that's not a very strong foundation. You build on your strength, and hopefully over time those weaknesses kind of either get fixed or they get dimmed. Are consistent with the mission and major goals. That's a big one. If we're creating and building our strategies, our organizational strategies that are not consistent with why we exist and where we want to go, then what are we doing? It's not a good one. One of my favorite missions is from a company called Legos. You guys all know Legos. And their mission is unlike any other mission. They're not building little plastic toys for kids to play with and for parents to step on when they wake up in the middle of the night and it's dark and they step on Legos. That's not what they're doing. What they're doing is they are inspiring the builders and dreamers of tomorrow. That's what they're doing. Here at Legos, we are inspiring the builders and dreamers of tomorrow. So what does that mean? Well, that means we're creating Legoland. That means we're creating Lego games. That means we're creating all sorts of different Lego designs. It means we're doing way more than just building toys. That's not going to keep us going. So if we're inspiring the builders and dreamers of tomorrow, does an initiative like Legoland make sense? Well, yeah, it does. But if we're building toys, does an initiative like Legoland make sense? No, we should make a different toy or make a different package. It wouldn't make any sense. So you can see how the mission of the organization certainly is important when you think about what it is you're supposed to be doing and how you're supposed to be doing it. These initiatives with campuses, and they have these strategic meetings. All of the initiatives have to be connected to the strategic goals of the college, or the initiatives don't take place. If the initiative can't be connected to a strategic goal, people will say no to them. And that's important. And that's good, because strategy isn't about what you say yes to. Strategy is about all of the things you don't do. Why you should focus on this and not all of those other things. It's more about saying no to things and saying yes to the right things. Okay, almost done. Implement the strategies. Obviously, that's important. Here's some questions you ask, essential questions. What businesses should I be in? How could I create value to these businesses? How will the value be superior to that created by other businesses or standalone businesses? What kind of systems, structures, processes do I need? Remember McDonald's system, structure, process do I need to achieve the target value? And what kind of resources do I need to achieve that value? Let's skip over that. We talked about mission, vision, and values, major goals, defining the business. Okay, so this is an important one. When you define the business, essentially, you have to think about your customer groups and your customer needs. So let's use McDonald's, for instance. Who is being satisfied? Just to throw it out there, we're satisfying people who want convenience when it comes to purchasing meals. They just want convenience. They want speed, and they want decent quality. Actually, they don't care about too much about quality. They just want speed, not too expensive, and decent quality. So what needs are being satisfied? Well, who's being satisfied? Those people who are interested in convenience, speed, and they don't really care too much about quality. And those people probably are busy. And the need that's being satisfied is they don't need to take a lot of time or spend a lot of money to buy food. So that's certainly a need. So who is being satisfied? So what are the needs? Sorry, who is being satisfied? We just answered. Now, what is being satisfied? The customer's needs. Well, they don't have a lot of resources, so they don't want to spend a lot of money on food. So you satisfy them by making the food less expensive. Another thing is they don't have the time because they're running home to take care of their 3 kids, and they just came from work and they're super hungry and they don't feel like making dinner tonight. So the need that you're satisfying is you're giving them a decent meal with a decent price. That's a great need. I no longer have to worry about what I'm cooking for dinner tonight. So now you're thinking about who we're serving, what needs we have, and now how are customers' needs being satisfied? These are your distinctive competencies. Back to McDonald's, you just saw an image of that. They make sure the fries are cooked in a certain kind of way. They make sure it's quick and convenient. It's super cheap. You just basically saw how they execute on who is being satisfied and what is being satisfied. And that's kind of how you define the business. Here at McDonald's, we are focused on the customer segment that is looking for quick, reliable, decent quality, and convenient food. We satisfy their needs by allowing them limited resources, and they don't have to spend a lot of time, energy, or effort purchasing dinner for their family. And we do that by creating economies of scale through efficient processes and operations so that we can offer the customer quick, convenient, somewhat affordable food. So I just defined in a very haphazard way McDonald's strategy in a sense. I define their corporate level strategy, what industry they're going to compete in, the business level strategy, what consumers they're going to serve, and their functional level strategy, how they're going to execute on that service of them through some of those distinctive competencies. Obviously dumbed down, but what I'm trying to get you to do is what I just did there, I couldn't do 6 years ago. What I just did there, I couldn't do 3 years ago. But the more you see these businesses, the more you understand how they operate, the more you understand the language of strategy, the easier it will be to take a look at a business and just be like, oh, that's how they're making money. These are the strategies they're executing on. So here are the characteristics of strong strategic leaders: vision, eloquence, and consistency, articulation of a business model, commitment to the strategy or to the organization. Why would you want to have a leader of an organization be involved in all the strategic planning come up with some ideas, give some feedback, implement those ideas, and not be committed to the organization. Would you want a leader to do that? And how detrimental would it be for an organization if a leader went through a 2-year planning process on strategy, started implementing the strategy, and then quit? That would be a problem. So that's not what you want out of strategic leaders. You need commitment. Being well informed, which means that we're asking questions to the people on the functional level, we're asking questions to people on the business level. I think, Andrew, if you're operating at a general manager level, the best thing you can do is look at the guy who's the CEO or was the CEO of Dick's Sporting Goods. His name is Ed Stack, and see the way that he okay, so Ed Stack, what he did was he created his organizational structure where he's at the bottom of it. And at the top of the organizational structure, he calls the athlete, which is the customer. And so he's at the bottom of his organizational structure. The athlete is at the top. And he says the athlete needs to do the most talking. The people that are closest to the athlete are the people that check you out at the store. If you've been to the new Dick's Sporting Goods in Dadeland, I don't encourage you to go there because you'll probably spend more money than you need to. But it's an awesome store. It's really awesome, actually. But it's very expensive. But the reality is those people who check you out should be the ones that the athlete should be talking the most. The payment people, the processing people that like they would wear referee jerseys at Dick's are the second people who should talk the most. The general managers, and then you have some of the corporate level managers. Ed Stack says, I am talking the least in these meetings. I'm talking the least and I'm listening the most. Why is he listening to the most? Because he needs to be informed what's happening within his organization. And when you're informed as a strategic leader, you have the most valuable thing you could ever possess as a human being, in my 2 cents, besides, faith in a higher power so you go to heaven. But the second most important thing would be information, knowledge. Knowledge is the beginning of the whole philosophical process of knowledge, conduct, governance. Knowledge is the beginning. Strategic leaders are knowledgeable about what the heck is happening within their company and outside their company. Okay, that's a strong pitch, hopefully, on being well informed. Willingness to delegate and empower, astute use of power, emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness, self-regulation, and motivation, empathy, and social skills. Boom. Good place to end. Let me stop sharing my screen and properly say good night. You reflect on some of these leaders that one might consider to be heroes and think about their lives